This is where the mind games really begin. And in this new age of conflict, seeing is no longer believing. Why would Putin make such risky and inflammatory moves? Forget the drones and the relentless meat grinder. The war in Ukraine is being won with lies. I'm Philip Ingram, and this is Battle Plans Exposed. Today, we're revealing the shocking truth about Russia's war of deception, from fake armies to ghost signals, and the lies the Kremlin is telling its own people. Wars aren't just about bullets and missiles, they're about smoke and mirrors. And we're exposing it all on every level. From the dawn of conflict, trickery and deceit have been weapons as potent as any sword or rifle. The great Chinese philosopher and general Sun Tzu in the 6th century said in his book, The Art of War, all warfare is deception, all deception is warfare. But in the 21st century warfare in Ukraine, this ancient art has been supercharged with technology, creating a conflict where the truth is the first and most frequent casualty, fought in the shadows, on the airwaves, and inside the minds of millions. This is the war of deception. We're breaking down the 3 biggest tricks being used to fool the world in this unseen war. Plus, we'll look at the greatest deception in military history. This is the truth behind the lies. So let's begin with looking at some examples of deception in the Ukraine war. At the tactical level, to try and deceive Ukrainian FPV drones, the Russians have given their soldiers invisibility cloaks. However, as we can see from the thermal signatures that are still standing out, these cloaks don't work in reality, and the FPV drones are having success at killing the Russian soldiers. Invisibility cloaks are just for Harry Potter and his movies. Self-sabotage is next, better known as false flag operations. And here we have a piece of critical infrastructure that has been blown up by the Russians, and they're trying to blame the Ukrainians. They tend to do this to create an excuse to react, or often to overreact to something, and then follow it up with disinformation or maskarovka in the press. Maskarovka, masking, it's a Russian doctrine for deceiving. And of course, there's nothing that gets away from good old-fashioned espionage techniques. And here we have Ukrainian agents operating inside Russia, some of them dressed as old people and old grannies, hiding. Now, when I commanded my intelligence battalion, I had a specialist surveillance section. Each of my operators carried 2 changes of look. Their clothes were all reversible. They had wigs, they had false moustaches and beards, but that was just for the ladies. And then often tactical deception comes down to luck. And here we have a Russian patrol, but they come across a Ukrainian soldier who clearly speaks Russian. And with the mismatch of uniforms on the front line, it's difficult to tell who is whom at different times. And he wasn't wearing the yellow or blue armbands that the Ukrainians do. He convinces the Russians he's part of their patrol, and they go on. The rest of this video is too graphic for me to show you because he deals with the Russian soldiers in a very violent way. They are no more. Let's get down to the front lines, or the tactical level. In a war of drones and deadly precision, where every tank, every artillery piece is hunted, the simplest deceptions can have lethal results. Both sides are masters of creating ghost armies. A soldier's biggest enemy isn't always flesh and blood, it's a fake. Take a look at this. From a satellite or a drone thousands of feet up, it looks like a formidable Russian T-90 tank, ready for a fight, a prime target. But it's not. It's an inflatable decoy. It costs a fraction of the real thing, but can trick the enemy into wasting a £1 million missile. It's a simple but brilliant way to deplete enemy ammunition and expose their positions. Of course, it looks good visually, but as we saw in some of the earlier videos, there are thermal imagers. So your blow-up tank has to have a thermal signature like a real tank. And there are other ISTAR, intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance technologies that are used in the battlefield. Radar is a classic one, and therefore your blow-up tanks have to have a radar signature like an armoured vehicle. This is where modern technology meets ancient techniques and is what we're seeing on the Ukrainian battlefield. It is still cheaper than there being a real tank there. It still wastes a multi-million-dollar missile, but it has the effect of not putting any personnel at risk. Ukraine has taken this to another level. Russia is desperate to destroy their game-changing American HIMARS rocket launchers. So Ukraine built an army of fakes out of wood. These incredibly detailed decoys were placed in convincing positions, tricking the Russians into firing multi-million-pound caliber cruise missiles at what was essentially a garden shed. It's estimated that for every 10 missiles Russia fired at a HIMARS, at least 4 hit a worthless decoy. It's a strategy that not only saves the real high-value assets, but bankrupts the enemy's missile stocks. This is a modern tactical deception, fooling the enemy into fighting ghosts, bankrupting them, whilst the real weapons get ready to strike. Now let's step up a level. This is where the mind games really begin. Welcome to the world of operational deception, where technology is used to blind and confuse the enemy. Deceiving sensors and intelligence, you're able to shape the enemy's entire view of a battlefield. One of the deadliest weapons here is GPS spoofing. Russia has deployed powerful electronic warfare systems that create a fake bubble of GPS signals. Drones and guided missiles fly into this bubble, suddenly lose their way, thinking they're hundreds of miles off course before crashing uselessly. It's an invisible shield, a digital minefield that can stop some of Ukraine's smartest weapons dead in their tracks. Ensuring surprise deception is critical to delaying the enemy. Like fake drones carrying no explosives or warheads, wasting air defense missiles, shooting them down, just in case they're real. But deception doesn't always need to be high-tech. It can also be brutally simple. Take a look at these satellite images of a Russian airbase. Those look like advanced MiG-31 fighter jets, the kind that fire hypersonic missiles. But look closer. They're not real. They're painted onto the tarmac. From space, these two-dimensional decoys are just convincing enough to make the Ukrainian planners waste time and missiles on a fake target. It forces Ukraine to second-guess its own intelligence. Is it a real threat, or is it a trap? Russia isn't just fighting in this way on the ground. They're baiting NATO in the air. We've seen a massive surge in Russian airplanes violating NATO airspace, pushing and testing the alliance to the limit, both politically and militarily. Russian MiG-31 fighters stormed into Estonian airspace for 12 minutes in a brazen stunt that put all of Europe on edge. They ignored warnings from Italian F-35 stealth jets that had been scrambled out of Estonia's Amari airbase to intercept them. Over in Romania, Russian attacks have breached their airspace, forcing NATO to scramble F-16s. And Poland has already shot down Russian drones, vowing to shoot down Russian aircraft if they cross the line again. The sun went right to the heart of the action on board the first RAF mission on NATO's eastern flank. We were there as 2 Typhoon jets, armed with air-to-air missiles, took part in a powerful 8-hour mission. Backed by a Voyager air-to-air refueling plane, Danish F-16s, French Rafales, German Eurofighters, the rotating aerial defence force is set to fly nightly missions. It is a message to Putin from the Allies: back off. So why would Putin make such risky and inflammatory moves? It's a classic decoy. He's deliberately trying to sap Western time, money and resources away from the real war in Ukraine, from protecting against it and from supporting the Ukrainians fighting it. While politicians are tied up in urgent crisis meetings, figuring out how to respond, and tied up in the dangerous game of chicken, Russia is free to grow stronger. This layer of war, the operational level, is about creating doubt and confusion. The Russians, as I said, have a doctrine, maskarovka. It doesn't just work at the tactical level, it works at the operational level and works at the strategic level. It's about feeding the enemy false information and drawing attention away from the real threats until they make a fatal mistake that can cost them the war. In Britain, we've seen this closer to home. Salisbury, the UK chemical defence establishment at Portendown. Where does this come into deception? Well, we remember in 2018, the poisoning of Sergei and Yulia Skripal with the deadly nerve agent Novichok. Of course, they were chosen because they lived in Salisbury, because Vladimir Putin knew that as soon as the Russians got accused of this, he could turn around and say, no, it wasn't me. It escaped from the British chemical defence establishment at Portendown, just outside Salisbury. And of course, as soon as Theresa May, the Prime Minister, stood up in Parliament and said that she blamed the Russians, Vladimir Putin made a statement to say, no, it wasn't me. It escaped from Portendown. And it had the effect. The leader of the opposition at the time, Jeremy Corbyn, stood up in Parliament the next day and asked the Prime Minister a question as to whether she could prove it hadn't escaped from there. My vision when that happened was Vladimir Putin sitting behind his very large oak desk in Moscow with a big glass of best Russian vodka in a best Russian crystal tumbler with a big white cat on his knee going, my job is done for me. I have created the doubt I needed to do. Finally, we reach the highest level, strategic deception. This isn't just about fooling a soldier or a spy. It's about fooling the entire world. This is Russia's global information war and core part of its military doctrine, designed to shape world opinion and justify its aggression. The target is the international community, and the goal is to sow division and doubt. The entire pretext for the invasion was a strategic lie, the false claims of denazification, and genocide against the Russian-speaking population in Ukraine. Since then, the Kremlin has waged a relentless campaign to destroy the truth itself. When evidence of the Bucha massacre emerged in 2022, a network of Russian state media and bot accounts immediately launched a three-pronged attack on the truth. First, dismiss. They claimed the evidence as fake, that the bodies were crisis actors. Secondly, distort. Russia shapes the narrative with countless alternative theories to create confusion. That maskarovka I was talking about, that masking. And the third, distract. Point to past Western actions to create false moral equivalence. Whatabouterism. Pass the buck. It's a textbook strategy, and this campaign is highly targeted. The NATO airspace incursions that I mentioned earlier, you've guessed it, they were labelled as fake news by Russian mouthpieces. Russia's Deputy Ambassador to the United Nations, Dmitry Polyansky, has said there was no evidence backing the claims of Moscow's incursions into NATO members' airspace, and accused the European powers of levying baseless accusations. In the global south, Russia pushes anti-colonial narratives, blaming the West for food shortages caused by its own blockade. In Europe and the United States, it seeks to amplify extremist voices, undermine support for Ukraine, and create political paralysis. It is a sophisticated, well-funded operation to make the world question the very nature of the truth itself. But the most important target for the Kremlin's lies isn't a foreign enemy, it's its own people. To keep this long, costly war going, Putin has to control what 140 million Russians see, hear, and believe. He controls their daily thinking. Inside Russia, there is no war. It is a special military operation. State television, the main source of news for millions, presents a completely sanitized version of the conflict. Russian soldiers are being portrayed as heroes, liberating oppressed people. Losses are downplayed or ignored entirely. Ukrainian leaders are vilified as Western puppets and Nazis. Independent media has been completely dismantled, and new laws can land you in prison for 15 years for spreading so-called fake news about the military. Severe punishments for dissent cultivate the atomization of the public with no collective power. This creates an information vacuum, a parallel reality where Russia is always winning and its cause is always just. This internal propaganda is the bedrock of Putin's power. It ensures popular support, or at least passive acceptance, for the war. It is a strategic deception campaign aimed not at an external enemy, but at the 140 million people the Kremlin rules. This level of strategic deception may seem new, but it has its roots in World War II. As the Allies prepared for the D-Day landings in 1944, they knew they had to fool the Germans about where and when they would strike. This led to one of the most ambitious deception plans in history, Operation Fortitude. In Operation Fortitude, the Allies created a completely fictional army, the first US Army Group, or FUSAG. They built hundreds of inflatable Sherman tanks and dummy landing craft, placing them in Kent, directly opposite the Pas de Calais. They generated fake radio traffic and even appointed the famous General George S. Patton as its commander, knowing that German intelligence would consider him their best general and would expect him to lead the invasion. The goal was to convince Hitler that the main invasion would come at the Pas de Calais, the shortest sea crossing. But the real invasion at Normandy was to be presented as a mere diversion. But the deception started much earlier. The deception started before D-Day and before the invasion of Northwest Europe was being put in place. It started with the invasion of Southern Europe, which the Allies went in through Italy, but they needed to convince Hitler they were going in through Greece. And to sell that lie, they launched Operation Mincemeat, one of the most audacious operations of the Second World War. British intelligence took the body of a homeless man, dressed him as a Royal Marines officer and chained a briefcase containing fake invasion plans to his wrist. They were classified, most secret. The plans hinted at invasions in Greece and Sardinia. Now, this was far from Normandy, but this was the first invasion of mainland Europe, whilst the Allies went into Sicily. They then released the body off the coast of Spain, knowing it would be found by Nazi sympathisers. The documents would reach Hitler's desk, which they did. The combined effect was a masterpiece. Even after the D-Day landings began in Normandy on June the 6th, Hitler was so convinced it was a feint that he held his best panzer divisions in reserve at Calais 4 weeks, waiting for Patton's real invasion. That hesitation gave the Allies the crucial time they needed to establish the bridgehead in France and ultimately to win the war. It proved that a well-planned lie could be more powerful than an entire army. In a more recent example, in the Kosovo crisis, I remember this well. The Serbs had realized that Western jets flying very high were identifying their air defense radars. They identified that a microwave oven gave out a similar signature to some of their air defense radars, and very quickly commercial microwave ovens were having their doors ripped off, the micro switch taped down and them switched on in the middle of a rubble building or in the middle of a field. Western anti-radiation missiles costing hundreds of thousands of dollars were being fired at microwave ovens that cost tens of dollars. I think we destroyed hundreds of them. From the inflatable tanks of World War II to the digital ghosts of today, the battle plans of deception have evolved, but their purpose remains the same: to confuse, to paralyze, and to manipulate your enemy. The war in Ukraine has shown that modern conflict is a hybrid war, fought both on the battlefield and in the global information space. Tactical deception saves lives and equipment, while strategic disinformation seeks to shape the outcome of the war by manipulating everyone from politicians to ordinary people thousands of miles away. Operation Fortitude showed that the greatest victories can be won without firing a single shot. In Ukraine, that lesson is being relearned every single day. The war for the truth is relentless, and in this new age of conflict, seeing is no longer believing. That's all for today on The Sun's Battle Plans Exposed. Please hit like, put your comments in, ask us some questions that we can address next time. But join us next time and we'll continue to uncover the strategies and secrets of modern warfare. Thank you. Goodbye.